Welcome back to the program. And just before the break, I was telling you about the United States' interest in doing greater business with Africa in a win-win situation. According to U.S. officials, American businesses opening offices in Africa would introduce a greater magnitude of made-in-America products to Africa and at the same time provide jobs for thousands back home. But as we know, China has footprints all over the continent. Mass-produced, made-in-China products have flooded our markets and homes. They're not only affordable, they're a necessity. But one Nigerian who closely followed discussions between African leaders and the United States is Dr. Uchenna Ekwo. He's with the Center for Media and Peace Initiatives. He bears his thoughts on the summit. Well, Dr. Ekwo, thank you for joining us. Let's just get your response to President Barack Obama's press briefing this evening, just after the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit.
What I can just say, maybe since you started from Obama's press conference, actually, before I do a preview of the entire conference, personally, I wasn't satisfied with the press conference, because the questions actually focused so much on other issues rather than the purpose of the summit. Of the 6 questions asked by reporters, only one of them addressed the issue about Africa, and that has been, a constant, problem, personally, that I see, especially within the media issues, about how Africa has always been put on the, on the backside, and we just saw it play itself right here now, and we did a summit for 3 days, and no one could ask questions, and of all the people that even asked those questions, only one guy who is a black guy actually asked the question, and I just think it's not the proper way. Having said that,
but do you think that, leaders had to go all the way across the Mediterranean just to have a summit here in the United States concerning Africa, when they could just have talked amongst themselves back in the continent?
Let me take you back to history. Way back in 1884, actually in November 1884 in Berlin, when Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany, convened the conference of Western powers, especially Europe, when they really shared, the continents. No African was represented in that summit. This summit, for whatever it is worth, historically is the first, and at least African voice, was heard. We have leaders who are here discussing issues about Africa, and of course also affecting other parts of the world. So that in itself is significant. The fact that Africans came on the table to discuss with other Western powers about issues about them, that's also important. But I know some critics will say, why don't we have this conference back home, like in African countries? But again, even the logistics, you can imagine if this conference was taking place in Nigeria, maybe there will be a power outage. So just as simple as that, and even other security challenges and all that. I believe that Obama also being a Kenyan, so to speak, let's put it that way. He's an African, let's face it. So he deserves some credit for really pulling off this, and most importantly, a lot of critics have said that he's not done enough for Africa and the world. I believe that if this summit is sustained, both the outcome and the output, if it's sustained, and like you also said at the press conference, which I think I like, the fact that this has to be sustained, even spoke about his successor, really, continue that challenge. I think it's good, because the truth about the matter is that the world we live today is interconnected. If you think Africa's problems should just be left for Africans, you're wasting your time, because it's going to affect other people. Ebola is one example. But the truth is that a lot of issues, particularly some of the challenges facing Africa, we actually discussed at different sessions. You may not have handled all of them, but at different sessions, at least the ones I attended, these issues about good governance, issues about corruption, issues about financial crimes, issues about refugees and stuff like that. And of course, good governance. And most importantly, the fact that Africans are being challenged by a different... I understand America has its own interest. There's no doubt about that. And it's legitimate. Every country does something or invests something where they have to benefit. But the good thing about the United States, unlike China, is the fact that they are also benefiting, and they also want you to benefit, as opposed to perhaps China that will go and invest or pursue a lot of business interests in Africa. without concerns about good governance or how things are governed. All they care is to get their own benefits and just go back, Whereas the United States will also be, helping to encourage our governments in the continent to do the right thing. And when you know that there's a spotlight, especially on the world stage, there is the likelihood that people will be more careful. One thing this summit may have achieved is to raise the profile of Africa at the international level, because the problem has been that Africa's issues have always been put at the back burner. So using his, both, usually in America they talk about using the president's office because he sets the agenda and all that. At least we're talking about that. No American head of state or president has ever done this. And also, giving his own African heritage, I think is also historic.
So what really do African leaders, stand to gain from the summit? Because they've had meetings like this in the past. They've, money has been promised, more allegiance to Africa's, supporting Africa's cause on the continent and so on. What really do African leaders stand to gain?
I also listened to Obama in one of the sessions where he spoke about, it's not just about talking, but action. And the fact that this thing will also, there's going to be a follow-up is also important, because he also said that follow-up will be to hold them accountable. Because today, on this summit, there were some commitments. They signed, it agreed to certain protocols and certain steps to take to change the face of Africa. So in the next summits or subsequent meetings and all that, I believe that there will be some benchmarks to measure performance, to measure their success. And in that case, I want to also talk about how also the media can also help to hold these people accountable to their pledge. Whatever has been agreed today has to be sustained. And the only way because one problem really, I'm a media critic. One problem actually with the media is this short attention span. This may have happened today, then take away the cameras. But when reporters like you, when you get back to Nigeria, you should be able to, and some other African countries should be able to, keep a spotlight on some of these issues that have been talked about today. And if there are some deviation, the reporter should be able to point this out, all right? If there are certain indices that indicate that somehow they are not following the benchmarks or some other records they have agreed upon, it should be pointed out. And possibly even report to some authorities, some agencies that are also supposed to be taking certain action. But one of that problem I think most African countries do have is the fact that they don't have strong institutions that should really propel governance. If you just depend on one single person as the president, the person cannot really do everything. Yeah, the presidents of these countries may have appended their signatures to certain protocol, but the truth is that down the line, other agencies will have to do that. Mr. Obama alone did not pull off this summit. You could see the retinue, close to 1,500 people working with him to get this thing done. So all these agencies must be put in place. If, for example, there is an agreement on narcotics, checking financial crimes, and you go to Nigeria, there has to be an agency dealing with that. Now, reporters should be able to talk to some of these agency representatives. Okay, there was an agreement in Washington, XYZ. What is the outcome? Because the leader of that agency that should be able to follow up accordingly. Otherwise, if we don't do that, because that's what media is actually supposed to be doing, otherwise they will be sleeping. I recognize there are some African countries that don't have some measure of freedom. He had him talk about media freedom as well. The truth about the matter is that we cannot succeed in Africa if we don't have some measure of openness. The secretive nature of governance in Africa got to change.
Well, you talked about President Barack Obama's African heritage. We know that his father is Kenyan. You think that may have had, something to do with why he organized the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit?
I have to believe that, because let me tell you something. In 2012, when I met with the former Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, Johnny Carson, that was when he even spoke to me about something being planned, because people were criticizing, just before the election, people were criticizing Obama for not really addressing African issues. And it was then that they were kind of mapping out a whole lot of strategies on how to really build with African issues. So when he announced in South Africa the Power Africa Initiative, I thought that was historic and that was really significant. And following up with this kind of conference, this kind of summit, I think it's good. But the important thing at the end of the day, I keep saying it, the problem is in us.
So I'm really going to talk about the elephant in the room, which is, whether the U.S. is in competition with China on Africa.
Yes, that question has really been asked so much. I believe that there is a continual struggle between, especially in economic matter, between China and the United States. In fact, some people have also said something like, what is going on is a second scramble for resources in Africa. All right? There is no doubt that every country has the legitimate right to, seek for resources or improve its economy, however it does it, that is legitimate and legal, by investing in other places. But the truth also about the matter is that, if you ask me, the difference between China's involvement in Africa and the United States' involvement in Africa, the difference is very clear. One, the United States will get involved in Africa to probably make them, kind of get close to some kind of partnership. They will invest and insist on due process, insist on good governance and stuff like that. Unlike China, that will just be interested in getting money and getting their resources. China will even import their people to Africa to be workers and laborers and all that. Whereas the United States will use local labor. Again, I'm also aware that the United States, in cases where there is corruption, or there are some corrupt practices within either a United States company and a Nigeria, let's say Nigeria, a company in Nigeria, that individual will face legal challenges at the end of the day. You may have had the instance of one of the aides of Dick Cheney, who got involved in one liquefied natural gas, whatever, in Nigeria. The guy, I don't know whether he has finished his term, but he was jailed here, whereas China will not do something like that. I also understand that most African countries, because of, quote-unquote, the dictatorial tendencies in Africa, some of them will kind of align themselves with China, because China, there's not like due process. They just have to do certain things, just get things done. Whereas in the United States, there's a way, let's say Mr. Obama, for example, there's a way he can intrude into affairs in Africa that can have some, reverberation here in the United States that will affect his, office. And he'll be very careful. We don't have something like that in China. If China says, you as a woman, I want you to become a man, it's a decree and it's done.
But it does sound like you're saying, that African leaders should do less business with China, even though you have already pointed out that they do have a legitimate right to be there on the.
Yeah, it's a free world. People should. I'm an apostle of freedom. No matter how you look at it, people should. In fact, even God gave us that choice. It's the greatest gift God has given us, that freedom to behave any way you want, do whatever you want, provided they do have some limitations though. If China wants to do business in Nigeria or in other African countries, that's fine. But then let there be some legal, parameters that they have to meet, like doing business in Africa. There has to be some measure of accountability, some measure of openness, due process. If the United States wants to do business in Africa, something. But the thing is, it's the choice of the host governments to determine which one suits their citizens the more. If the United States is doing business in Africa and they're helping to create local labor, isn't that better to reduce unemployment? Whereas China will bring their own people. This is a country of 1.2 billion people, and they have so much people starving and hungry and all that. So they want to help themselves first. And bottom line, that in international relations, every country
always wants to help itself first.
That's what I'm saying. It's a selfish war. Every country must protect their citizens first. That's the primary responsibility. Okay, look at this press conference we did today. Yes, Obama is the president of the United States. Even though it's an African issue, but he has to address some issues that are so central to the United States and so central to his office. So the first law is the law of self-preservation.
Dr. Ekwe, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you so much. Good to see you. Thank you so much.
And that's the program this week. Remember, you can watch Diplomatic Channel on Channels TV's YouTube portal for any of the editions you missed. You can leave us a line on our page on facebook.com/Diplomatic Channel or via Twitter @DiplomaticChan. I am Amarachi Obani. Thanks for watching.